Dear students, hope you all know that GST is included in fourth semester BCom, and also there's a paper indirect taxes in sixth semester BCom under Guwahati University. So I have taken a lot of classes offline in college, but I feel that some of the things, some of the points are not clear to you, and at the same time, you're also not in a position to come to college. So here I've decided to go online to clear certain points which you might feel necessary. That's why I have come to online today. See, this is a picture which is a common picture, all of you know. I've started with this. This picture indicates that goods are being transported from one state to another state, from one place to another place all over the country. And it takes a lot of time in different check gates, and a lot of taxes are there imposed. This was the case before GST was implemented. And this is the temple of Devi Kamakya temple in Guwahati, Assam. And why I've taken this particular picture here, I'm just telling you some story, one story particular of my own story, personal story, which I'll relate to GST, goods and services taxes. See, long back, I came to Kamakya with my mother. Just listen to the story. And I came out of the bus. I got down with my mother. And then one beggar came, or you can say one sannyasi came. He asked me 10 rupees, and I paid him. And after some time, I walked, and another sannyasi came. He also wanted something from me, and I paid him 10 rupees. And after some time, one more, and then one more, and then one more. And ultimately, I paid 17 people 10 rupees, 10 rupees, 10 rupees, like that. And ultimately, I reached the temple. I went inside and worshipped. Next day, my friend in university, he asked me, what is your experience yesterday about visiting Kamakya? I said, this happened. I paid 10 rupees, 10 rupees, 10 rupees to 170 rupees totally to 17 people, 17 sannyasi. And then I entered the Kamakya temple. And my friend said, why have you done this way? This is not the way. You could have given only 100 rupees to the main priest, main panda. And that would have been the solution that would have been possible for you, and that would give you more satisfaction and less time. So if you pay 100 rupees to the main panda, that would have been a bit cheaper, my friend said. But you have paid 170 rupees this way. Dear friends, this is the case of GST actually. Before GST was introduced in India, there were 17 types of indirect tax, maybe 17, 18, like 16, like that. I'm saying 17 types of indirect taxes in India. And the businessmen used to pay these types of indirect taxes, like sales tax, like VAT, like excise duty, custom duty, then octroi duty, then entertainment tax. Lots of taxes were there, indirect taxes in India. And the businessmen used to pay all these taxes. And ultimately, these taxes, burden of these taxes, used to be shifted to the consumers, the customers, this we, us, and ultimately cost of goods have been more. But when GST was introduced on 1st of July 2017 in India, then these indirect taxes went off. These indirect taxes have been subsumed by GST. And now only one tax, just like I said, I paid 10 rupees, 10 rupees, 10 rupees to 17 people, and 170 rupees I paid. Instead, I could have met the main priest and paid him, suppose, 100 rupees. That would have been cheaper, less time taking. Similarly, in GST, so many indirect taxes were there. And after GST came, these indirect taxes are not there. These have been subsumed by GST. And now only one tax, one nation, one tax, as you know. And ultimately, the tax burden on the customers, on the consumers has been reduced. And the consumers now, can purchase the goods at a cheaper rate and services also the cheaper rate. So GST has reduced the tax burden. This we can say, and even we are going to prove it. I gave the example of Kamakka just to explain exactly the concept of GST. What is it exactly? In very short. Hope you understood. Hope you liked. So please remember exactly what is the mechanism of GST. So this is Kamakka temple. I gave this example. See, dear students, when GST was first introduced in India, many people opposed it, many people criticized it. Before, when GST was being introduced in India, during that time only, many people criticized. And this I have written that whenever you do something new, there will be many people to criticize it, that thing. Similarly, GST was criticized. And you might have seen that earlier a lot of TV talk shows and many things were there during the preparatory period that GST used to be GST will be GST will be introduced in the country during that time. And even after it was introduced, lots of criticisms were there. And here I've written this way, even independence was initially opposed by certain section of people. Even independence was criticized. See, that is the thing. Even independence was criticized. So it means that whenever you do something new, there'll be a lot of people to criticize this. And so GST was also criticized. Then you have to remember mainly two acts. One, Central Goods and Services Tax Act 2017, another Assam Goods and Services Tax Act 2017, because we belong to Assam, so we have taken Assam Goods and Services Tax 2017. In other states also, they are having their own GST Act. So these are the acts you have to go through. We need to go through these records. This contains the all technicalities of GST. And certain questions that come to our mind whenever the question of GST comes. These questions, if clarified to you, you have understood lots of GST for your exam purposes and for general knowledge purposes. We have to understand what is GST. We have to understand, will GST reduce or increase price? We have to understand, will GST reduce or increase gross domestic product? We have to understand, is GST a complex mechanism? We have to understand, is GST a threat to the business? Then is GST a hindrance to small businesses? Will GST reduce corruption? Will GST reduce social inequality? Will the what is the global experience of GST? So these are the things we need to clarify. I'll be taking up these things on a general basis, and syllabus will be covered that way. Exactly the meaning of GST, what is it? And whether GST is going to increase or reduce the price, because many people criticized when GST was introduced or when GST was being introduced that it will increase the price. These things were there, criticism. Now, whether GST will reduce or increase gross domestic product, GDP, we have to clarify that, we have to understand that. And there are lots of criticism earlier on this point. So we are going to clarify these things step by step. And we have to understand whether GST is a complex mechanism or not. Is it too much complex? Will it be a problem for the businessman? And is GST a threat for the business? Because many people say GST is a threat for the business. GST will be a problem for the business. And many people say that GST will be hindrance for the small businesses. And many people said that GST may increase corruption. We shall find out, understand, clarify, analyze, explain whether GST will reduce corruption or not. Will GST reduce social inequality? Also point, social inequality, whether GST is going to reduce that. We shall understand that. And we shall also know that before GST was introduced in India, 160 countries had already introduced GST. France is the first country to introduce GST in 1954. And this way, 160 countries had already introduced GST before India. We shall have some idea, some knowledge about that. That will be very interesting for you all. And this is the topic, GST's technicalities and implications. So this is me, GST. So GST and its technicalities and implications, these are things we are going to learn on several videos, one after another. I'll be sharing to your WhatsApp group or Telegram group. So here you have to understand two things. What is direct tax and what is indirect tax? See, direct tax is that tax where burden of tax cannot be shifted. But in indirect tax, burden of tax can be shifted. Here you just remember two things. One is impact, other is incidence. Incidence and impact. When incidence means incidence is on a person who first pays the tax initially, and impact is on the person who ultimately bears the burden. When incidence and impact are on the same person, it is said to be direct tax. When incidence and impact are on two different persons, it is said to be indirect tax. When incidence and impact are on the same person, like income tax, it is direct tax. When incidence and impact on two different persons, it is indirect tax. You know, the businessman pays the tax, GST, and businessman collects it from the customers. So here, incidence is on the businessman, impact is on the customers. And what is tax? All of you know, nothing to explain here. It's a compulsory contribution by the government on the citizens. This is tax, all of you know. And I've clarified what is direct tax and what is indirect tax. And obviously, you have understood that GST is an indirect tax. So these are the taxes before, indirect tax is levied by government. Before GST was introduced, these are the indirect taxes. In case of central government, there are service taxes, central sales taxes, excise duty, security transaction tax. All these taxes are levied by central government before GST, and GST and indirect taxes levied by state governments include VAT, sales tax, octroi duty, state excise, property tax, entry tax, agricultural tax, all these things. All these taxes were introduced by state governments. As I said, that there are 17 types of indirect taxes, almost 17 types of indirect taxes. And students of 6th semester, you are having indirect tax laws. In case of GST, this chapter, you please learn what are the indirect taxes that were levied before GST was introduced. You can also you have to learn what is the history of GST in India and history of indirect taxes in India. This may be taken up separate video. So these were the indirect taxes, and many more. I have given some examples only. So it's not moving. Okay, let's see. Yeah. See, GST means goods and services tax. But on the date of introduction of GST, Modi ji said it is good and simple tax. Jokingly, he said in his inaugural speech on 30 June 2017 at 11:55 p.m. Because after 5 minutes, it will be 1st July. He spoke on 30 June 2017 at 11:55 p.m. And after 5 minutes, it would be 1st July 2017. So before 5 minutes, he delivers his lecture. He jokingly said that GST is goods and services tax. That's true, but for me, it is good and simple tax. And dear students, we have to understand, we have to prove, we have to explain and interpret and find out whether GST is really good and simple tax. Otherwise, why so many countries have introduced GST, but in not a single country, GST is, abolished. Every country, whichever GST is introduced, there were some problems on introduction, but later on, GST stayed and GSTs there. So maybe it has some inherent power, inner strength of GST itself, that it maybe it's good, it may be that is very simple. So that's why GST is so popular all over the world. So GST, just a little bit, 1 to 2 minutes. GST was first introduced during 2007-8 budget session. On 17th of December 2014, the current Union Cabinet Ministry approved the proposal of introduction of GST Constitutional Amendment Bill 2014, when this present government, BJP government, came into power. Modi ji was a prime minister first time, and on 19th of December 2014, the bill was presented. Bill was presented on GST in Lok Sabha. And how is GST, applied? GST is consumption-based tax, because tax is ultimately, burden is borne by the consumer. That's why it is known as consumption-based tax. The person who consumes, that person has to bear the tax. Otherwise, the burden is shifted from manufacturer to wholesaler, from wholesaler to retailer, and retailer to consumer, and consumer cannot shift the burden. It is also known as, destination principle. So destination principle means the manufacturer produces the goods, and the goods are transferred to wholesaler, and wholesaler transfers to retailer, and retailer transfers to consumer. So consumer does not transfer, it destroys, ultimately consumes. So ultimately GST is, that's why destination based tax. So I'll also discuss you about what is ITC, means input tax credit, and consumer has to bear this tax, and GST, that's why is known as the last point retail tax. So these things I'm going to deal in a new video, and we shall also prove how GST lowers the final cost. And this, there are two types of government in India. Federal system is there, central government and state government. Before scrapping of 370, Article 370, there are 29 states, 7 union territories, and 3 units having legislature. And after scrapping of Article 370, we are having now 28 states, 9 union territories, and 3 union territories having legislature. So this we shall discuss in another video for explaining how GST mechanism works on. These are the union territories: Chandigarh, Dadra, Nagar Haveli, Daman, Diu, Lakshadweep, Puducherry, Andaman, Nicobar, Delhi, Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh. And these things we have to remember. So these things we shall take in a different video. So that will be nice. We shall take different video from here. What is dual GST model? I'll take up from this. I'll take up in a separate video. So thank you very much. The students, please go by the video and feel free asking me questions whenever you need. And we shall take up more videos like this very soon. And you can also send me message about which particular points I should